Roll call for Legislative Day 2, January 11th, 2023. Anderson. Baldwin. Barlow. Whitman. Boner. Bouchard. Brennan. Case. Cooper. Dockstader. Ellis. French. Furphy. Guru. Hicks. Hutchings. Ide. Jones. Kinski. Kolb. Landon. Larson. McEwen. Nethercott. Pappas. Rothfuss. Salazar. Schuler. Scott. Excuse. Steinmetz. Bouchard. President Driscoll.
Here.
29 present, 1 excused, 1 absent. Okay.
Prayer by Father Tom Conklin.
Let us pray. Lord God, now that all the opening ceremonies and formalities are completed, be with us as we begin the people's business by crafting legislation and resolutions and by addressing the needs and issues of our state, which will become before us this session. In the Gospel of St. Luke, the scholar of the law asked Jesus, "What must he do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus asked him, "What is written, and how does the law say?" The scholar said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Jesus affirmed his response, but the scholar asked, "Who is his neighbor?" To which Jesus responded by telling the parable of the Good Samaritan. He ended the parable by asking the scholar, who was neighbor to the one who fell in with the robbers. The scribe responded, the one who treated him with compassion. As we deal with many issues this day which will come before us, help us to keep the needs of our neighbors forefront in our minds, so that we may treat everyone with love and compassion, recognizing that we always do this with the help of your divine grace. We ask this in all things, in your holy name. Amen.
Senator Kolb, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the reading clerk please read the Journal Committee report?
Mr. President, your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of January 10, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Senator Larson, Chairman.
Are there any objections? There being none, the report is adopted. Chaplain of the day today, Father Tom Conklin Jr., Church of St. Mary Cathedral, Cheyenne, Wyoming. Many thanks. Doctor of the day, Dr. John Winter, orthopedic surgeon from Cheyenne, and he's around here somewhere. Can you come up and say hi to us? We'll keep him as long as we can. As slick as the sidewalks are, he'll probably have to leave shortly. Today in Wyoming history, 1970, 2 blocks were completely burned to the ground in Cheyenne downtown. And the big history for me was this was the start of the winter 1886, 1887 that kind of marked the end of the range cattle industry in Wyoming. There was probably 80 to 90% of the cattle in the state were killed in that period of time. So kind of interesting. Quote for the day: "No one can whistle a symphony. It takes a whole orchestra to play it." H.E. Lucock. We found that out yesterday. So announcements, reminder that all owe $185 made out to the Senate Courtesy Fund. Please give it to the Leadership Secretary. And we'll get her in here one of these days and recognize that we've got one of the best secretaries we could possibly have. So no introduction, reading, and reference of bills. Okay, we're going to do a switch here. Reports from standing committees.
January 10, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate Joint Resolution 1, amending Wyoming's Act of Admission for leases and earnings. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 10, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 57, State-Held Drainage District Bonds. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman. January 11, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 5, Agriculture, State, and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom was referred Senate File 29, Brucellosis Management Updates. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators French, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Excused, Senator Hicks. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman. January 11, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 5, Agriculture, State, and Public Lands and Water Resources, to whom is referred Senate File 73, Lawful Fences. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman. January 11, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred Senate File 4, North American Industry Classification System Amendments. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. January 11, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom was referred Senate File 11, Cancer Early Detection Amendments. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman. January 11, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred Senate File 48, Education, Suspension, and Expulsion Model Policies. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, and Steinmetz. Excused, Senator Scott. Senator Steinmetz, Acting Chairman. January 11, 2023, Mr. Presidential Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred Senate File 49, Safe School and Climate Act Amendments. Respectfully reports same back to the Senate with a recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, and Steinmetz. Excused, Senator Scott. Senator Steinmetz, Acting Chairman.
Thank you. Is Jesse Driscoll close? Come up, Jesse. So I don't think we have to do a lot of introduction, but this is Jessie Driscoll. She is my niece, and she's our page here. And I'm here to present your pin. And I don't know if you want to do extraneous speaking, but if you'd like to do a little short. Would you like to, if you want to wait? Off over here.
Over where?
Right here is side mic.
I'd just like to thank you all for everything you've done. I've made so many amazing connections here already, and it's only day 2. And I cannot wait to continue to be your guys' page till not this coming Friday, but the next Friday. And I will take every memory and keep it forever because I am forever thankful for everything you guys have done for me. Thank you.
Thank you. So she didn't use her opportunity. Jessie actually went to Girls State and she has a bill coming up that'll be her bill, so she'll work the crowd. I'm going to allow her to do that to get support for her bill that's coming. So with that, I'm going to do a quick introduction because I got some guys pinned on the wall tonight at Frontier Park. The gaming industry is sponsoring food and drink and festivities, and they've got pool tables and games and all kinds of fun things. And a couple of the sponsors came to town for it, Michael Pace and Alan Joseph. So welcome and thank you for sponsoring, and everybody come have some fun tonight. They like to see people have a good time. Thank you. Introduction, reading, and reference of bills. Senate File 55, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 55, Chancery Court Vacancies Extension Management, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
Senate File 55 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 69, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 69, Electronic Records Retention, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
Senate File 69 is referred to Committee 1, Judiciary. Senate File 91, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 91, Creation of Tenancy by the Entirety, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
Senate File 91 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 99, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 99, Witnessing of Wills, Remote Methods, sponsored by Senator Barlow.
Senate File 99 is referred to Committee Number 1, Judiciary. Senate File 100, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 100, Designation of Spouses, Revocation upon Divorce or Annulment, sponsored by Senator Barlow.
Senate File 100 is referred to Committee 1, Judiciary. Senate File 66, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 66, School Capital Construction Funding, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee.
Senate File 66 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Senate File 71, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 71, State Loan and Bond Programs, sponsored by the Appropriations Committee.
Senate File 71 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Senate File 85, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 85, State Funds, Streamlining Transfers and Distributions, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
Senate File 85 is referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Senate File 81, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 81, Monthly Ad Valorem Tax Revisions, sponsored by Senator Barlow.
Senate File 81 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 90, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 90, Wyoming Property Tax Relief Authority, sponsored by Senator Case.
Senate File 90 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. Senate File 98, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 98, Education Certificate of Completion, sponsored by Senator Barlow.
Senate File 98 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. Senate File 84, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 84, Education Model Student Attendance Policies, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
Senate File 84 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. Senate File 27, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 27, Weed and Pest Mitigation Tribal Inclusion, sponsored by the Tribal Resources Committee.
Senate File 27 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 28, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 28, Livestock Infectious Disease Control Tribal Inclusion, sponsored by the Tribal Committee.
Senate File 28 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 82, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 82, Eligible Water and Sewer Projects Funding, sponsored by the Water Committee.
Senate File 82 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 87, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 87, Natural Resource Funding Large Project Threshold Increase, sponsored by Senator Cooper.
Senate File 87 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 96, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 96, Omnibus Water Bill Planning and Administration, sponsored by the Water Committee.
Senate File 96 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. Senate File 88, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 88, Hunting Licenses Weighted Bonus Points System, sponsored by the Travel Committee.
Senate File 88 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. Senate File 86, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 86, Voter Identification Concealed Carry Permit, sponsored by Senator Hutchings.
Senate File 86 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 92, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 92, Small Customer Electrical Generation, sponsored by Senator Case.
Senate File 92 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 93, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 93, Limited Liability Company Reporting, sponsored by Senator Case.
Senate File 93 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 89, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 89, Insurance Coverage for Hearing Aids, sponsored by Senator Furphy.
Senate File 89 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. Senate File 72, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 72, Employees Forced Microchip Implantation Prohibited, sponsored by Senator Larson.
Senate File 72 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor Health. Senate File 79, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 79, Plan of Safe Care Newborns, sponsored by Senator Baldwin.
Senate File 79 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor Health. Senate File 94, first reading of the bill.
Senate File 94, Federal Indian Child Welfare Act Codification, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
Senate File 94 is referred to Committee Number 10, Corporations, or Labor Health, excuse me. Senate Joint Resolution 2, first reading of the joint resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 2, Recognizing the Service of Lester C. Hunt, sponsored by Senator Case.
Senate Joint Resolution Number 2 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor Health. Senate Joint Resolution Number 3, first reading of the bill.
Senate Joint Resolution 3, property tax exemption for the elderly and infirmed, sponsored by Senator Dockstader.
Senate Joint Resolution number 3 is referred to Committee number 3, Revenue. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, we're at that order of business, consideration of bills on general file. Senator Hicks, Majority Floor Leader Hicks, excuse me.
Mr. President, I move the Senate resolve itself into Committee of the Whole.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Motion carried. Senator Anderson, would you please come take the desk?
We have this all mucked up.
Congratulations, you got this, man.
I hate that. I don't do it to anybody. It's annoying.
It's gonna burn my
This
eyes.
is not of my creation.
You know, we can't see it, right?
We'll get there.
We need the grease board.
Hey, for the peanut gallery, trying to keep it down on the peanut gallery. You too. Mr. Chairman,
Committee of the Whole will please come to order. And Senator Hicks,
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this will be the first time, so, and for you new members, usually we had a whiteboard up here, and so when you would come in here and you would see what was on Committee of the Whole, it would be up on the board up there in front of you. So we're gonna try to pioneer a little new technology here, so if we can just bear with us as we work through there, as we're still trying to refine this to get the system up and running. I'm just gonna run through the bills now, Mr. Chairman, for people that can't see them. And you will still get your paper out on your desk in the morning, but this is the first day. Committees just met last night, this morning. So there's just a little bit of a lag time. What I'd like to do today is try to get through about 6. These are fairly easy bills to get through as we work through the system. So, but as you can't see those, I'm gonna go through and read this list for you now so you can kind of jot these down. So the first one is appropriations bill, is Senate Joint Resolution number 1, Enabling Act Amendments, a resolution. Next one is Appropriations Committee, which is Senate File 57. There's going to be State-Held Drainage District distributions. The next one is Agricultural, is Ag Committee, Senate File 29, Brucellosis Amendments. The next one is Ag, is Senate File 73, Lawful Fencing. The next one is Labor, Senate File 4, North American Industry Classification System Amendments. The next one is Labor, Senate File 11, Cancer Early Detection Amendments. And I think you can, I'll go finish these out. Next one will be Education, Senate File 48, Education, Supervision, and Expulsion. The last one that we may consider today would be Education, which is Senate File 49. Safe Schools, I can't even read my own writing here, Mr. Chairman, but if we get to Senate 49, my plan is today, Mr. Chairman, is just kind of work through these. What I'd like to do is for these first couple of bills, what we want to do, because we do have new members here, at any point in time, if somebody's not sure exactly what we're going on or where we're at or in the process, we'll just stop. And what I would like to do is we get to the first two of these, Mr. Chairman, is before we actually vote, make sure that there's any questions or any things before we vote. And I would ask for just a little latitude if there is any confusion, that we would go back and redo that just to make sure that the systems are working correctly. Everybody knows where we're at. So, Madam Chief Clerk and Mr. Chairman, what I would suggest is when we get to the first one, let's do a mock-up vote before we do the official vote, so people understand the process, particularly for the new members as we read through the roll call vote. Well, these are voice votes, but as we do that, but we'll do the same thing, I think, when we get to third reading the very first time and the first bill in third reading. Any questions at this time from any members? If not, Mr. Chairman, I guess we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you for that, Senator Hicks. That is very helpful. This is the first time we've had these whiteboards, and before we had a handwritten whiteboard that you couldn't read. And so you new members, you will not have experienced that, but a lot of us have that had a hard time. The other thing about that is that at any time, Senator Hicks can change that order. So don't think you're set in stone. He can change that order of what bills are coming up or not coming up at any time. Can you do that from your desk, Senator Hicks?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. Now, historically, you would see the majority floor leader go up there and erase something or move something and add it. Mr. Chairman, what I will try to do at the appropriate time is if there is movements among the bills, would be recognized from the chair and say, I have rearranged some order of bills for consideration on general file, because it would be very easy for somebody to be trying to get ready to present and not see that order change. And so,
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out. I think that'll be
Okay.
important as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. So remember, pay attention to that board, and he's going to give you a heads up, but sometimes people don't hear the heads up. Pay attention to the board. You'll see if your bill is coming up or somebody else's bill is coming up. And the reason for that is we want to move quickly, and if you're the chair that needs to move that bill, we need you moving it and moving it quickly. So with that, we're going to start through this process. It is a pretty simple process. The committee of the whole, yes, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have vision issues, and I would like to know if you could make it just a little bit bigger so someone other than Senator Bouchard can see it.
Yes, thank you,
Just a little
Senator
large.
Hutchins, I agree.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah,
See, I'm
yeah.
not the only one.
All right, yeah, good.
Yay.
Good job, Mike. Thank you. Thank you. Now you can see them. Okay, we'll get started. The first bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution number 1. The reading clerk will please read the resolution.
Senate Joint Resolution 1, amending Wyoming's Act of Admission for Leases and Earnings. A joint resolution requesting Congress to introduce a bill and enact law to amend Wyoming's Act of Admission to authorize the expenditure of earnings for the support of the common schools in Wyoming and to amend the authority for leasing state school lands. Sponsored by this Capital Finance Committee. It was referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Grew, Kinski, Netherscott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate Joint Resolution SJ01. By way of introduction, I would let you all know that this is one of a number of bills that you will be seeing throughout the course of the session that deal with modernizing our statutes to update them to reflect the fact that investing in the 21st century is a lot different than it was in the 19th century and even in the 20th century. And this is one of a series of bills that does this. This is addressed to the Act of Admission, 1890. And for an explanation of this bill, I will turn it over to my colleague on the Senate Appropriations, Senator Salazar.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honorable members, as the good chairman said, this is a resolution requesting Congress to introduce a bill to enact law to amend Wyoming's Act of Admission to authorize the expenditure of earnings for the support of the common schools in Wyoming. Basically, senators, what this does is this gives us a greater return on the state's money. If you happen to look at page 3 of the bill, you will see that on line 4, the common school account with the permanent fund has grown over the years and has been invested to where the current value of the fund exceeds $4 billion. If you look at line 17, which is really the meat of what we're trying to accomplish, the amendment to Wyoming's Act of Admission that would replace references to interest and income with reference to earnings. We believe this will better reflect the reality of how the common school account is invested and will allow the earnings that are generated from the investment of the permanent funds of the common school account to be better and more efficiently applied for the benefit of Wyoming's public school. Some of you may have the question, what's the difference between interest versus earnings? Well, interest is just that, interest. Earnings, using the word earnings, encompasses a greater definition which could yield dividends, unrealized income. It's a broader term that includes that which allows the state then to receive more of from our investments rather than just the interest itself. Throughout this 7-page bill, you will then see the language changed from interest to earnings. Again, good senators, this is a resolution that will need to come from Congress, and we are simply asking Congress to consider to pass this legislation so that the state of Wyoming can receive greater financial benefit with this fund. I will tell you that I think it's been distributed to your desks, the memorandum that both the state of Idaho, excuse me, I apologize, 2 states in the West have gone forward and done similar actions. So this is not new. And I ask for, or the Appropriations Committee asks for your support. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Any questions about the bill? Are there any questions? Senator Rothfuss. Oh, you want to speak? Okay. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and my apologies for not having had the opportunity to review, since this is the first day, all of the details of the memo, but I am a little bit curious not only about who's done it before, which I think is the topic of the memo, but maybe a little more detail on the implications financially. I do understand the difference between the earnings and the interest, but what additional revenue would that provide for direct use by the schools if we were to implement this relative to what we're allowed to use right now? So kind of the differential before and after passing of this, if anyone either from the Appropriations Committee or the Capital Investment Committee has some recollection of those numbers, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Or someone wants to answer that, or are you waiting for more questions?
More.
Wait for more questions. Here's Senator Boner. Go ahead, Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Similar lines, unfortunately, I didn't have quite time to review the memo that was just put on the desk, but still a bit more information about the process. if this does go through Congress, it gets approved, is there something that we have to do on our end to agree to the changes? Is this basically the last time that we're going to have a chance to vote on this? Just a little bit more about the process, whether we need concurrence with the state once, and if that congressional action has already been taken.
Any other questions before we get to the maker? You got a question? Oh, okay. Okay, yep, Senator Hutchings.
Thank you,
Some-
Mr. Chairman. Quick question on page number 5. We've deleted lines 10 to 15. I'm just wondering why we're going to omit the leasing for mineral, grazing, agriculture, and other purposes in this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dockstader, did I see you standing up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to sort this out, resolution versus a piece of legislation that would do something. We got 2 states that have done it. We have to have a certain number of states to jump on board to make this happen. I understand the proposal, it's a good thing, but just not sure that we're close to getting anything done here.
Senator Boner, did you have another? Oh, no. Senator Nethercott, did you have a question, or are you just exercising?
I'm just exercising. Mr. Chairman, I can answer some of these questions as a member of the committee if you'd like.
I guess I'll leave that up to the chairman. He says yes.
So
He says he'd like to have you answer them.
I can't wait for next week when we're figured out what we're doing here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, good members of the Senate. Excellent questions. To address the first one concerning, from the other senator from Laramie County, concerning the removal of the stricken language which says, but said lands may, under such regulations as the legislature shall prescribe, be leased for mineral, grazing, agriculture, or other purposes, provided that the term is not to exceed 10 years. That language has been stricken to be more modernized and really allows for more authority for the Office of State Lands to lease all of the state lands for any purpose that they may deem would be beneficial to fulfill their fiduciary obligations to maximize those revenues under state law, and just eliminates those specific purposes and broadens the scope for all purposes that could be done under state lands. So I hope that answers that question on that front.
If it doesn't, I bet they won't ask any more.
Certainly, and Mr. Chairman, if I can, an active admission certainly to the good senator from Lincoln County. Will it do anything now? No, it will not.
Senator Kinski.
Heels of that, it won't do anything once we pass it, except go to our congressional delegation and ask them to ask the U.S. Congress to change our act of admission, as happened in the situation of 2 other states. So let's get in the Wayback Machine. 1890, you had bonds and you had stocks, and what stocks you had were very risky. So typically in a portfolio, you just hold bonds and you'd prohibit any kind of loss. You know, from year to year. If the market happened to go down, somehow that had to be made up. You zip ahead to the current century, and you have bonds, you have a very efficient stock market, and then you have hybrids, such things as mutual funds. We all probably have mutual funds. There's something called convertible debentures. So that's a bond that the bondholder has the option to convert it to stock. So is that a stock or is that a bond? But those all have certain sorts of characteristics that may make them desirable as investments. There's also something called private equity. It's not yet a stock, but that's important because your highest returns come in that field, and our permanent mineral trust fund has a significant amount of money in private equity. So what is that? Well, it used to be if you were a private company and you grew and then you needed to raise capital, you'd say, I know what we'll do. We'll sell stock. And then we'll raise capital, and we can grow bigger still. In the modern era, it's not that way anymore because private capital markets are so efficient. Companies that want to grow can find all the money they need, whether through venture capital or through banking arrangements or some combination of the same. So they're already private. I mean, think of all of the big stocks of the last 20 years. Then what they did is, in order to cash in, their payday comes when they sell it on the stock market. Well, by then, all the money has been made. So the idea here is that we've got a fund from 1890 that basically wanted us to hold a bunch of bonds and just spend the interest. And that is absolutely, positively the lowest return you can get. And so to my friend from the Ivory Tower, I will see if I can, for second reading, assuming this makes it out of first, I will see if I can quantify that either in anticipated dollars or more likely the percentage return. I know that the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, because that's held for a 20, 30-year time horizon, it earns between 5 and 6%. A portfolio of nothing but bonds is going to be significantly lower than that. Information about the process. What do we do after this? Assuming that Congress acts, we will then have to take additional actions to make sure that the balance of the great investing machine of the state of Wyoming kicks into action. So what is that? By act of this legislature, the funds are invested in the state treasurer's office with outside investment managers and monitored by the treasurer's office, or some are invested directly by the treasurer's office and monitored, but that's all overseen by the State Land Investment Board, the SLIB. And they in turn, for every portfolio that we have, whether it's a permanent mineral trust fund or this fund or any other fund, they set a portfolio management strategy with what kind of risk they can take, what kind of investments they can and cannot make. And that oversees all the efforts of the treasurer. So we've got plenty of sideboards there on the investment processes. And so I think it would be a matter, but I will see if I can get you further detail, my good friend, on that. And then I hope that answers all the questions. I hope so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to try to add on and provide some edification of the question from the good majority floor leader. So if you go to page 5 and you look at that line 9 and 10. And so one of the constraints with this is, again, it gets back to what constitutes interest. And interest in the constitutes back then is a good appropriation. It's bonds. That's where you get interest. The way this is structured now by earnings, and keep in mind what that says is that interest of which only shall be expended in support of the said schools. That's the public school system. By changing that to earnings, and now you have additional potential revenue because you have other opportunities to invest. It may be dividends that would go. It could be realized capital gains that could go in here to help support. So the whole idea behind this, and when we've studied this in CATFin, we had both Idaho and we had New Mexico come before and talk about, you know, the way they did. Excuse me, correct, the potato and the chili pepper states.
Yes, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, but the idea is to generate more revenue than what we're limited to right now, because it really comes down is the other states have already done this. It's clear constitutionally wise, it's clear under the Enabling Act that they can do this, but the overriding idea is to increase our investment returns, and then when needed, be able to use those like we currently do from the Mineral Trust Fund. If we decide to liquidate some stocks and we have realized capital gains, that's available for the legislature to spend. Right now, it's not clear if you had that same scenario because of the wording in the Enabling Act says interest. And I hope that helps answer the majority or minority floor leader's question.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to rise in support of this bill. It's really nothing different than we've done in all our different funds that we've had. And it's been about a 25-year process as we've gradually had a more balanced portfolios and got away from only interest-bearing things. And so this would allow not just stocks, but it would also allow for capital gains. You could sell stuff when it's high, have that money, all increasing the returns to the Common School Land Fund. If we have the same success that we have with our Permanent Mineral Trust Fund and the Common School Land Fund, we'll be very happy. And we have a very conservative investment portfolio with our permanent mineral trust fund. It is now constitutes a significant bit of our earnings, far outweighing a lot of our taxes, except for the one on the mineral industry. And finally, I'll wrap up with just a note about the use of proper nouns. It's perfectly okay to say the states of New Mexico and Idaho if we use proper nouns when it's a complementary, connected, educational thing. We don't use proper names and proper nouns for things that might be sensitive, and you just have to use a little courtesy, especially if it's a pejorative statement or if it's someone that by identifying the proper noun or place or whatever could be viewed as being pejorative. So it's okay to say Idaho. It's perfectly okay to say New Mexico. The rest of the states you can't say, though.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Rising on in support of the bill, and really appreciated the memorandum provided to us by the Appropriations Committee. It did bring a smile, Mr. Chairman. It looks like Idaho was able to pass its bill, and 2 years later it was signed into law by Congress. And New Mexico had an even better time. This was now back in the 90s. And the smile, for me, came from the fact that it does make you wonder if we can be that efficient back there now. Last week didn't engender a whole lot of confidence, but good effort, and I really appreciate, I think it's worth doing. I just hope that our counterparts at the federal level can step up and maybe get something to happen. So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Landon. We hope we can make you smile. Senator Furphy, when I find you, right there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify some things. So on page 2, it says on line 19, the income to be used for university purposes. And then if I'm understanding what's going on at the end of, on page 7, it talks about university purposes, colleges, etc. Am I understanding that correctly, that it is only for the university and colleges that those funds are to be used for? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothfuss, did you have a question before we answer?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did, and thanks. I appreciate the members of the Appropriations Committee addressing the first concern. I'll look for kind of some numerical details on second reading, but I am a little curious about striking the shall not exceed 10 years, and I'd like to hear discussion about that. I do get the concept of having much broader language, recognizing that it's not just for agricultural and mineral purposes and grazing at this point in time, but one thing that is being struck is the limit not to exceed 10 years, and then leaving it entirely up to the legislature or state law or the Office of State Lands. What was the discussion around eliminating the 10-year maximum?
Any other questions before the maker answers? No? Senator Kinski, would you like to address those two?
Please, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, with respect to my colleague from the southeast part of the state, if you, let's go back to the bill. And so we go through introductory language on up to 4. And on 4, we get to section 1 of the bill and section 2 of the bill. And on page 5 at the top, section 2 says, we make the following changes to sections 5, 7, and 8 of the Act of Admission. So sections 5, 7, and 8 dealt with common schools, or what we now call public schools, as well as the university. So you remember there were alternating sections given over to schools and education. So part of this deals with amending the word to earnings, both with respect to lands on the universities as well as the common schools. So we're amending several different sections of the act of admission would be the explanation on that one. The striking on 10 years, what we found on, in capital finance, let's take a look at that language. So if you go to page 5, start on line 12, the act of admission talks about leases for mineral, grazing, agricultural, or other purposes, provide the term of agricultural and grazing leases shall not exceed 10 years. In fact, when you look at everything except grazing leases, there are situations where the board finds that they can maximize the revenue, cut a better deal for the state by going beyond the 10 years. And so they simply want to have that same flexibility with regard to agricultural and grazing. So I'll give you, for instance, what we heard is that cell tower agreements, for instance, go 35 years of the life of the improvements that are on the property, because what cell tower company is going to want to sign a lease of limited years and spend millions of dollars on the improvements. So the idea is to put agriculture and grazing leases on the same footing as every other type of lease. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anything to add, Senator Salazar? Good, okay. Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report, that do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate Joint Resolution number 1, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. That barely snuck by. Okay. What? It passed, yeah. Do what? Senate Joint Resolution number 1 has passed the Senate on the Committee of the Whole. And then we move on, but before we do, I wanted to, one other item of decorum in our institution here, and I saw Senator Hutchings do a nice job of it. The speaker is talking to the chair, so don't walk between the speaker and the chair, or I'll call you on it. Senator Hutchings came from back, on the back side, came down that side, was perfect. She did not get between the speaker and the chair. So just don't get between the speaker and chair. You can move around all you want as long as you're not between the speaker and the chair. Thank you. Yes. Mr. President. Yes, go ahead.
Fellow senators, please join me in welcoming Janita Summers, which is Speaker of the House, Albert Summers' sister, and Ann Noble, and they're both well-respected authors. So please join me in welcoming out of the group.
Welcome to the Senate. I'm sure you're going to get to see the House too. Senator Jones. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, privilege of the floor.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Jones.
If I could just give a reminder that Shishi Jam is having a breakfast tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. and they would love for you all to attend. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that a change to the agenda? You changed 57? Oh. Yeah. So 29 is first. Okay. Okay. All right, this is a good example of watching that screen. Senate File 29 is your next bill, and we had Senate File 57 as your next bill, but you can see on the screen that it's 29. So Senate File 29 is the next bill, and will the reading clerk please read Senate File 29?
One moment, please.
Put your glasses on.
Senate File 29, Brucellosis Management Updates, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee. An act relating to agriculture, livestock, and other animals. It was referred to Committee Number 5, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators French, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Excused, Senator Hicks. Senator Steinmetz, Chairman.
You have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report it, do so with a recommendation that Senate File 29, Brucellosis Management Updates, do pass. And for an explanation of the bill, I will call on the good Senator French.
Senator French, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate File 29, this bill updates the brucellosis management program operated by the Wyoming Livestock Board and the Wyoming State Veterinarian. This bill allows for discretion in determining if cattle that test positive for brucellosis, also known as BANGs, should be branded, updates the brucellosis surveillance program, and changes the requirements for veterinarians to provide documentation to the Livestock Board to receive compensation for brucellosis testing. As you can see in this bill, it just cleans up some language and adds a little bit, basically all it does. So I'll stand for questions.
Any questions on Senate File 29? Any questions? We're all going to be brucellosis free. Questions being called. Questions being called. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report, they do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 29, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. That bill, Senate File 29, barely scraped by the Senate today. Okay. Next bill to come before us is Senate File 57. Would the reading clerk please read that in?
Senate File 57, State-Held Drainage District Bonds, an act relating to public funds sponsored by the Appropriations Committee. It was referred to Committee Number 2, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Senators Anderson, Guru, Kinski, Nethercott, and Salazar. Senator Kinski, Chairman.
You've heard the reading. What is your pleasure? Senator Kinski.
Mr. Chairman, I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 57. And for a fuller explanation of this fine piece of legislation, I will defer to my colleague from Teton County. Oh, I can say Teton? Okay.
You can say Teton or Senator Guru or whatever you want to say. Senator Guru, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good members of the 57th, I bring you, or 67th, I guess, I bring you, 67th, I bring you Senate File 57. Senate File 57 is another in the suite of bills that you'll be seeing from the Appropriations Committee and Capital Finance and Investment Committee to clean up a few things. This bill happens, and I'm sorry that my good friend from Bates Creek can't be here this afternoon to probably fill in some of the blanks on this, but in 1931, the state approved for the good people of the Lovell Irrigation District $24,000 to do some work up there in the basin. Well, time went on, payments were made, and then payments stopped. And don't know all the particulars, but either through shifting or reforming of districts or whatever, that debt has been on the books ever since. Today, our good esteemed treasurer has a bit of a problem. It's $24,000 debt he's been carrying, and he can't invest it. So the money, and as we all know, today, 1 out of every $4 in our general fund comes from investments. So we don't have to raise taxes, so we can do better. And a way for us to do better in that and to start to raise those numbers is the bill that you had before you just a few moments ago and other bills like this. What this bill does, in essence, just take a look, is that it approves an appropriation of $24,000 from the general fund to pay off the debt from our friends in Lovell and the district's long since gone astray or gone away, and then allows then for that money to be invested and to put it to work by the treasurer's office to invest to help all the citizens of the state of Wyoming. That's basically what this bill does. And I urge your support and stand for any questions that you may have.
Questions on a 1931 debt? Question being called, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Kinski's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that they do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 57, say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. There again, Senate File 57 passes the 67th Senate. Next bill up is Senate File 73, and will the reading clerk please read that in?
Senate File 73, Lawful Fences, sponsored by the Agriculture Committee, an act relating to agriculture, livestock, and other animals, was referred to Committee Number 5, which returned committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators French, Hicks, Ide, Kolb, and Steinmetz. Senator Steinmetz, chairman.
You've heard the bill. Committee, what is your pleasure? Senator Steinmetz, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 73, and there is an amendment. I'd ask that it be read in at this time.
Senate File 73.
Standing committee amendment?
Yes.
Yes.
Senate File 73, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 5, delete.
And Mr. Chairman, I would move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 73, and then ask for the good Senator Kolb to give an explanation of this bill and the amendment.
Senator Kolb, can you give us on the standing committee amendment? We need to move that first before we move to the bill.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The standing committee amendment, I'll read it in, page 1, line 5. Delete, limiting the shared, and insert, providing that a subdivider is responsible for the. Next is page 2, line 23. Before construction, insert cost of. The next is page 3, line 3. Strike parties in and insert subdivider. Next, page 3, line 4 through 9. Strike all existing language and delete all new language. Next is page 3, line 10. Delete all new language. Mr. Chairman, on page 3, line 10, that excludes the at the end of that sentence. That the stays because it is part of the existing language.
All right, Senator Kolb. Now that hard for me to believe there's any questions with that explanation. Yes, Senator Rothfuss. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Amendment.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, the point of order is that the amendment hasn't been moved yet. And Mr. Chairman, just as a reminder, there's no reason to begin with the amendment or to move the amendment at the beginning, just obviously have to move it before we go to it. So it's certainly in order to walk through the bill so that we have the context of what the amendment would be amending and then bring that in along the way and then move it prior to final passage or at the beginning. So making sure that we have the logical connection. But at this point in time, the point of order is simply that we would need to move Standing Committee Amendment number 1 before taking action.
And I thought you did, but you didn't move that Standing Committee Amendment number 1?
I will move Standing Committee number 1.
All right, thank you. And Senator Rothfuss, are you suggesting that we should go through the bill before we vote on the Standing Committee Amendment?
Mr. Chairman, on that point, not always, but usually it is helpful to understand the context with which the amendment is constructed. So going through the bill first and then bringing in the Standing Committee Amendment either along the way or afterwards. Starting with it, honestly, we just saw these bills about 30 minutes ago, so I couldn't tell you what was amended. And I suspect I'm probably not the only one, so just a thought.
Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to explain the bill as it was originally presented before the amendments.
All right, it sounds like that's a favorable thing for the Senate, so let's go ahead and hear the bill too. Go ahead, Senator Cole.
Senate File 73. This bill increases the fine amounts for the misdemeanor offenses of constructing or maintaining an unlawful wire fence from $5 to $25 to $150 to $750 for the first offense, and from $25 to $100 to $750 to $3,000 for each subsequent offense. This bill also limits the monetary contribution required by the adjoining landowner to the subdivision for the construction of a perimeter partition fence to only 1/2 of the cost to construct statutorily defined lawful fence. Any additional costs for that perimeter partition fence will be borne by the subdivider, who is also liable for any damages caused by livestock pastured on the adjoining land that may breach the perimeter partition fence or wander into the subdivided land. This bill would be effective July 1 of 2023. I'll stand for questions.
Is that the explanation of the bill?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Chairman.
All right. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's what I wanted to ask, if I could ask a question about the bill or I had to ask it about the amendment. So thanks for clarifying that. Actually, my question is really simple, and I should know this as a former ranch girl, but what do we consider an unlawful fence, a wire fence? Would it be a barbed wire fence, or maybe somebody can give me some clarification on that? Thank you.
Another question. Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is just the backstory on why we have this bill in front of us and kind of what the problem is you're trying to solve. Thank you.
Any other questions before the maker responds? Any other questions? Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know, just being naive about agricultural issues. An unlawful wire fence, what makes it unlawful, so I can understand why such a increase in the penalties? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question would be, the query would be, what is the change from animals to livestock entail? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Senator Kolb, are you ready to answer all the questions?
I believe so, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
The definition of a lawful wire fence is a fence that is necessary to restrain said animals behind the fence. So that it's basically it has to be constructed for that purpose. It can't be constructed for dogs if it's going to retain buffalo. So it all depends on the animal being restrained. The next would be the backstory on this. It's a subdivision situation where there's a ag property and in this case, I'll give the example of a developer comes in and buys up property next to ag, constructs a subdivision. The current law states that the owner of the ag property is in fact responsible for half of the construction cost of the fence that separates the partition between the ag and the subdivision. So the situation has come up that subdivisions have put in elaborate walls, very elaborate walls, well beyond the need of restraining the animals. It could be, you know, a nice cement wall or a rock wall or a very elaborate wall that is not necessary for the restraining of the animals' purpose. So we have a subdivider that came in and developed next to an ag property, and this was trying to rectify the issue where the subdivider could put in any wall he or she sees fit, as nice as it is, and it's frankly subsidized by half of the ag owner who lives adjacent to said land, you know, where this between the ag and the subdivider. So this is to put the burden of responsibility back on the subdivider in the half of it on the original bill. But the amendment, I'll just talk about that for a second. The amendment shoves it all on the subdivider. If the subdivider wants to put a nice wall up, they can, but they're responsible to put up an adequate wall for the purpose. And then also maintain said wall for that purpose. That's part of that amendment. That's really, in a nutshell, what it does. It shoves the maintenance, the cost of the wall, all on the subdivider instead of the ag owner, who frankly, in many cases, has no, you know, that they weren't a party in that development. So they're bearing half the cost for, I would ask, is that fair? And that's really a question of fairness here. And if you think it's fair for that to happen or not. And that's basically what this bill does. I'll stand for further questions after.
All right, thank you. Any further questions? Further explanation? Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to clarify on the definition of livestock. Livestock means horses, mules, asses, rabbits, llamas, cattle, swine, sheep, goats, poultry, or other animal generally used for food or in the production of food or fiber, and guard animals actively engaged in the protection of livestock. Bison are considered livestock unless otherwise designated by the Wyoming Livestock Board. So that is the definition of livestock. Thank you.
Thank you. That piqued their interest. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Chairman. Privilege of the floor.
Oh, why don't you wait just a minute till we finish this
Okay.
amendment?
I don't,
Is it time sensitive?
no.
Oh, okay. Let me just finish this amendment, please. Senator Kolb, did you have something else? No. Oh, yeah, tell your mic to.
Apologize for the person, Mr. Chair, who brought the question about what's the difference between the change in the livestock. I neglected to answer that. Thank you to Senator Chairman Steinmetz for answering.
I get the feeling she might not have answered that. Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as a former member of that agency that was responsible for addressing some of these issues, it occurs to me that one of the issues we had was when the property owner, the livestock operator, to use the term that's being amended in, changed species of livestock, that may change the fence necessary to keep those livestock off the neighboring property. And I also noticed in that definition of livestock that yak are not included, but that's for another day. So I do think that while this does get to it, and Mr. Chairman, I can say I have this instance with property that we operate as a ranch. We have a subdivision and other developments next door, and there are changes both on both sides of the fence with the type of livestock and the type of uses that occur. So I think that we have to be careful we're not double playing the liability. Now we're pushing off a greater liability on a subdivider because the adjacent landowner, the livestock owner, brings another type of livestock which the lawful fence does not keep out. And by the way, I do not have a lawful fence on my place. Based on the current statute, all of my fences exceed what is lawful under current statute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One comment, we're a fence-out state, except in the case of sheep, I think they have to be fenced in. So that's what Senator Barlow's talking about. That really changes depending on what kind of animals you're running. So Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, so on the amendment, I'm curious at this point. My understanding is that by striking lines 4 through 9 on page 3, the intent is to shift all of the cost to the subdivider. But with the good senator from the northeastern part of the state that just spoke's concerns about a change to the type of appropriate fence, I guess I'm struggling with whether or not this is an appropriate solution as an amendment, because I can see that circumstance arising where now all of a sudden this subdivider has to come back and change their fence every couple of years, maybe? Is that how it would play out or not? Honestly, I don't know, I don't understand whether that would go into effect. As the subdivider's coming in for the first time, I think it makes perfect sense. But now I am wondering what happens when I change the use case as the agricultural enterprise. Does the subdivider then have to take action to remedy the fence? And I don't know if anybody has that answer, but I'm curious about it. Appreciate it.
Another question from Senator Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with most of what this bill is trying to do here, but we got to remember that this is a two-way street sometimes. When that livestock producer grazes this pasture down where it looks like this tabletop, that livestock will go through that fence, lawful or not. Also, there is a change in usage. I got a call from a constituent. As you know, most of you know, I'm a little hard of hearing sometimes, or maybe I don't pay attention well enough, but I got a call from a constituent and she was having problems with feral kids. And I said, well, would you explain that? And she said, well, I think it's this neighbor over here and their kids are just running wild. And how can I fence them out? I said, well, the first thing is don't shoot them. You know, let's think this through. But it turns out it was feral pigs instead of kids. So there's a difference in usage. You know, this land was used for cattle for years. And then two neighbors over got a bunch of pigs and turned them loose, and it's a problem. So who is responsible for fencing those pigs in or fencing them out? And what is a lawful fence for a pig as compared to a cow? So there's some questions here that may or may not be answered by what we've done, but I like the idea of it, but I'm just not sure we're 100% there.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Senator Larson. Just a minute. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I sat on this committee and we discussed this issue intensely for quite a few hours. I'm reluctant on the amendment. I think we're on the amendment.
Yes.
And I probably will be voting against both amendments. I think over the period of time and in court, maybe I'm not a lawyer, but I've always heard that if it's on the boundary, you're liable to build the fence and share the cost. And I guess I'd be worried that we're changing what has happened over a period of time. And I know I don't want the landowner, the livestock owner that is next to a subdivider, to have to pay for a rock fence or whatever. And that was the whole intent of this bill, was to make it so they only paid for a lawful fence, the share, the half. And I worry that if we add this extra amendment that the bill may die. So I'll be a no vote on the.
Senator Driscoll, did you have a comment? You're on. No. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thought maybe we'd bring it back around and fence this little bill in. I appreciate all the good discussion. This will affect people across the state, and so this kind of discussion is very appropriate and appreciated by your Ag Committee. I did want to go back and talk about where you can find the definition of a lawful fence. I don't want to read it all to you because it's pretty long. It's found in 1128-102. It tells you what the specifications of a lawful fence are. So if you'd like to look that up. And then right under there are where the penalty section would come in that we're amending. Those penalties have not been amended since 1881. And so that, that is the reason that your interim Ag Committee decided to take that up. The issue that we are having all across the state as we see the subdivisions coming in, it's the same thing you'll see in some of the water bills that we're trying to grapple with, is how do we deal with that when you're changing from a traditional ag use and going into a subdivision, and who bears the brunt of that, and how we navigate this situation. And I don't think anyone wants to prevent either one. What happens is right now state law says that you can construct a fence and send the adjacent property owner a bill for half of that fence. And so we're getting people getting bills for $9,000 for half of a Taj Mahal fence that, is way more than what would be needed to keep livestock off of the property adjacent. And so we're trying to solve that problem. The first attempt was just to say that they only needed to pay for half of a lawful fence. And then we had a landowner come into our committee the other night that requested this amendment, who was telling us about the astronomical bills she was incurring. And so we decided that maybe the subdivider, as the cost of doing business, could put that fence in around their subdivision. There will be a subsequent amendment saying that to clean that up a little bit. So as we work through this, that's what all of this was intended to do. And this amendment intends to say, look, if you're going to build a subdivision and it's, we're fencing out livestock, you need to pay for the perimeter fence around that subdivision. If you want it to be much more than a lawful fence, then you are bearing that cost. And so that's what this bill is designed for and why we're bringing it to you today. So I would, unless Senator Kolb has any more to add, I'll let him go ahead and finish this out. Thank you.
Senator Driscoll.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and go just a little. I'm speaking on in favor of the bill. I think it's a good bill. I'm going to do just a tiny bit of explanation, Mr. Chairman, as far as the lawful fence. If you read through it, and it goes into Wyoming's laws pretty deeply, is lawful fences are nearly all set up around cattle operations. So they're basically a wire fence or a deal. Wyoming's a fence out state for sheep, buffalo, horses, most other animals. So if you're a fence in with those, then you're going to have a fence that's different than a lawful fence. It goes back to good Representative Barlow's comments as far as if you've got something different, you're going to do more of it. So it hits that way. And that's probably my one concern is the unlawful fences is how we protect the people that have them. Because this day and age in Wyoming, I would tell you most every ranch fences are not legal anymore as far as your lawful fence. We may need to look at an amendment to say lawful fence or exceed it, because if you got a fence that's taller, different type, it's going to make it an unlawful fence, and we don't want to take anybody. Good fences make good neighbors. We don't want to make somebody degrade their fence so that they're legal and they're not in trouble. So I'm not sure that we may have some advice from people on the committee that know better, but I ran buffalo at one point in time, and I can tell you almost every fence on my ranch does not meet a legal fence definition. So just a thought, if we're cleaning things up, maybe someone with a little more expertise could talk before second reading and find out if we're creating something they have to do the changes. A little more history, we did this subdivision deal almost 10 years ago when I was in here, and we were having real trouble. Subdivisions came in, and that's exactly what they're doing, was building a legal fence. And a bull breached the fence and tear their yard up and rip their meter off their house, and then they'd come and want to sue the landowner. And, we kind of pulled that liability off. I can tell you almost every ranch in Wyoming, unless they're doing it themselves, that has a subdivision, it's not a friendly subdivision as far as animals go. So thank you, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Kolb, did you have a follow-up?
I do,
Let me get Senator Hicks before you answer up.
Mr. Chairman, so the nature of the problem is we see these subdivisions come in. Typically, these are land developers, so it's not an adjacent landowner. It's somebody that's doing this, and they're going to subdivide it. They're going to put it in plots, and they put in all the infrastructure. Can't have a subdivision without infrastructure. It goes through the county planning and zoning board. You have to comply with all of that stuff. So that includes things like water, sidewalks, sewer, all that infrastructure is required or you can just plat a subdivision and then let each individual come on and do that. But what the problem that we're running into is in some of these planned subdivisions, what happens is the subdivider comes in and puts in part of the infrastructure. And then you get a number of people acquire these parcels. And then if you have to go back and there's 20 people, 20 parcels out there, you have to go to each one of those, 20 different individuals, and say, now you're responsible for half of that fence, which becomes pretty untenable, and particularly when people don't know the law. So we end up in litigation, and this drags out, or as somebody alluded, somebody else put in they want a very well right out of Home Depot vinyl fence and all these things that come in, and they hand you a bill for, you've got 200 feet of fence line, and it was an $8,000 fence, and you're responsible for half of it. It's a problem out there in places. That's going to become a more problem, because we've sat here and we've debated what this has done to your property taxes as people come into these highly desired areas and they continue to subdivide and drive property taxes up, and more people come in. It's become more of a problem than we didn't have 5 years ago. So that's part of the issue that we're trying to grapple with, to deal with. And that's why it was like, it makes sense to put it on the person that was actually developing the subdivision, not the next 5 or 10 landowners that come in that didn't know the law and it wasn't in the covenants and wasn't required, and pretty soon they're getting livestock all over them, and then they have to go build a fence. It's just problematic the way it's currently constructed, the way we're seeing subdivisions happen around the state of Wyoming. So that's the issue that we're trying to grapple with, Mr. Chairman. So specific to the lawful fence, I'm just going to read it so everybody knows exactly under the statutes what a lawful fence is. So put this in his mind. This is the only thing that subdivider has to put in. Our lawful fence, 1128-102, a fence made of steel, concrete, or sound wooden posts. You can't just put up some branch that you dug out of the garbage dump up as a post. 3 spans of barbed wire not more than 15 inches or less than 10 inches apart. So the spacing can't be more than 15, can't be less than 10. Or you can do 2 spans of barbed wire or a wooden rail on top. 2 strands of barbed wire, wooden rail on top. That's what a lawful fence is. And it says the posts have to be set in the ground. If you're going to use wood posts, they have to be at least 4 inches around. All this is in statutes. And so all we're asking to do is, if you're going to go through the process of acquiring a piece of ground that's most likely currently zoned agricultural RAM, and you go in and you do a subdivision review with your county, and it's going to have to show the streets, you're going to have to show the access, the easements, and all those other things through those subdivisions. These only applies to those platted subdivisions that have to go through currently through county planning and zoning. And all this is saying is, at that point in time, you have to build the fence. It's a 3-wire fence. There's millions and millions of miles of 3-mile fence out there, folks. Almost every BLM allotment in the state of Wyoming for your internal fences is a 3-wire fence, unless you're running sheep, then it's probably woven wire. So it's not uncommon. It's not this big expensive fence. That's the issue that we're trying to grapple with. It's just saying, if you're gonna go through all this effort, just build the fence to start with, instead of shifting it onto the next 20 landowners that buy those parcels in that subdivision. So I hope that clarifies what we're trying to accomplish. May not be perfect, but if anybody else has got a solution to the problem, I'm sure we can work it in the second meeting amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. I feel like I've got a doctorate in fencing. Senator Kolb, have you got something to finish up on that?
Yeah, I'd like to bring it home, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
To answer the question from the good senator that was on ag and why just the half changed, well, it comes down to this: maintenance. Who is going to maintain said fence? And so if it's electric, who's going to check it? And that's why it shifted to the subdivider. Just a brief explanation. I think anybody on the ag that was there and we had conversations deserves that. And it probably is beneficial to the body on the controversy you get into on maintenance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Sensing the body's ready to vote, yes.
On the amendment, Standing Committee Amendment 1 to Senate File 73.
And if you give me just a minute, I'll tell you.
Okay, thank you,
All
Mr.
right,
Chairman.
thank
I just
you.
want to know
Thank
what I'm
you.
going to vote on.
Thank you, Senator. All right, sensing you're ready to vote on Senate File 73, Standing Committee Amendment number 1, that is, let's see, that was Senator Kolb's motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same no. That passed. Senate File 73, Standing Committee Amendment number 1 passed. Now, Senator Ide, I'm going to get back to you on your privilege of the floor, please. Oh, excuse me. Senator Ide.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was a rookie mistake. I don't need that anymore. Thank you.
Okay, all right. We can take care of that one very quickly then. The next thing we have is a standing committee, committee of the whole amendment. Did you want to move that? Oh, you're pointing to Senator Kolb? Senator Kolb, did you want to move the committee of the whole amendment, also committee whole amendment number 1?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
You're on. What?
Read it in.
Oh. Why don't I have the reader read that in? Yeah.
Senate File 73, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1, page 3, line 3, in the Senate.
All right, now, Senator Kolb, would you like to move that?
I would like to move.
There you go. Well, wow, we're moving now. All right, go ahead.
The amendment is page 3, line 3. After subdivider, insert the responsibility for the cost of maintenance of the perimeter partition fence shall be between a subdivision and the adjacent lands shall transfer with the ownership of the subdivided lands. The intent here is to make sure that the lands that were transferred and hold the responsibility, not the original subdivider for the fence. It was to clarify that, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, and we're just kicking off some of the dirt here the first day, but I think it's important that for the record, we explicitly say, I move Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 73 and make sure that we're adhering to all of the protocol for the motions, Mr. Chairman. So if you could help me with making sure that we're going through all that procedure, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'll do that. You want to rephrase that, Senator Cole?
I move Senate File 73, Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1.
Okay. All right, and you've explained it. Are
And
there
I'll,
any,
and I'll stand for questions.
okay, is there
Chairman.
any questions on Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 73? No questions? Sensing you're ready to vote, all in favor of the motion, the Standing Committee Amendment of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to, what did I say? Committee of the Whole. Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 73, signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That Senate Committee of the Whole Amendment Number 1 to 73 has passed the Senate. Now we're up to Senate File 73. Do we have any more comments on Senate File 73? Nobody wants a doctorate in fencing? Okay. All right. We're ready to vote on Senator Steinmetz's motion that the Committee of the Whole rise to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation on Senate File 73. Say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Senate File 73 passes the Senate. Yes, Senator Hicks.
I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Okay.
I believe the motion was to be that Senate File 73 as amended passed Committee of the Whole. Is that not or not correct? Or it's just Senate File 73? I see the chief clerk nodding her head yes.
She's nodding at no. That's a no.
No, it is not as amended.
But
Correct?
I do like that. I do like that verbiage, but I didn't use it. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
On the point of order, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Committee of the Whole, you don't have to say that as part of the verbiage. It's accurate, but we don't have to say that. But what we do have to say during Committee of the Whole is that it has passed the Committee of the Whole as opposed to the Senate, and that is a concern because it hasn't passed the Senate. It's only passed the Committee of the Whole. So the as amended it isn't necessary to state, even though we do that in committees. We don't.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other issues? Any other issues? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. One thing I learned from our good chief clerk when we were kind of knocking the dust off was the motion to adopt the amendment has passed, not the amendment, because the amendment can't pass without the bill passing. And so it's a motion, the motion to amend has passed. It's not the amendment that has passed. It won't pass until the bill passes. So that was something she helped me with on my my review of our Committee of the Whole notes. So if that might be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? If not, we'll move on from 73. Next bill to come before the Senate is Senate File 4. Would the reading clerk please read that in?
Senate File 4, North American Industry Classification System Amendments, sponsored by the Labor Committee, an act relating to workers' compensation. Was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You've heard the reading. What is your pleasure? Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so at the recommendation that Senate File 4, North American Industry Classification System Amendments do pass I believe there's a standing committee amendment. Can I ask that that be read in, please?
Senate File 4, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 1, line 3, after.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For explanation of the bill and the amendment, I will turn to Senator Barlow.
Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the good Senate. Bring you today Senate File 4, which is a bill that if some of you have served in this body for quite some time, you've seen something similar about every 5 years. Because what occurs every 5 years is the classification system that this bill is referring to is updated. It's updated to reflect what industry is actually doing and how employment is actually being handled with regard to our system that takes care of workers who are hurt on the job, workers' compensation. So what you see here is, first I'd like us, I think we'll take the amendment, Mr. Chairman, which I believe was moved by the chairman.
Not
Was
moved yet.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would move Standing Committee Number 1 to Senate File 4 and provide an explanation.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, what we're done here is we added the ability, a repealer language to the title. This bill has a repealer at the end, and that was not noted in the title, so that was added by our committee. And that's the good eyes of one of our committee members that found that. So that's the Standing Committee amendment. So unless there's a question on that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to dispense with the Standing Committee amendment.
Any other questions on the Standing Committee amendment? The motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 4 has by, let's see, that was moved by Senator Barlow. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, same sign. That passes. Senate File 4, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 has passed. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I'll walk quickly through the bill. As I said, my colleagues, this bill is an update of our code, which we use. This keeps us in sync with those other states around us. So we're all talking about the same thing. So you will note, and I'm just going to go, what we're really talking about is categories within categories and subcategories and subsectors, et cetera. So you'll see there's some changes on page 2, wholesale trade. And these are just these are just updates that happen every so often. You see the numbers are just a numbering change. That's page 2, multiple. Then you get to page 3, it's retail trade, subsection G. And you'll see some changes in there. And then you get to to page 4, and there is, on line 10, it's information. That's another subsection of employment types that there's been some adjustments made in this NAICS code, and that's the shorthand. Substantive, it looks substantive on page 5, Mr. Chairman, if my colleagues would turn to page 5. What you see is on lines 5 through 11, you see a significant strikeout. And so, well, what happened? Did we just get rid of fire protection, including firefighters, et cetera, et cetera? And actually what has occurred was when we did this the last time, we didn't catch something that was inaccurate. So this NAICS code on line 4, 92-215 was actually parole officers and probation officers, as noted in the new language on 11 and 12. And there's a new code, or a different code, which should have been used for that fire protection. So what's being stricken out is just being moved to a different category, and the appropriate category of employment is being placed in on the previous one. And then if, Mr. Chairman, if I could, the repealer is very specific to fuel dealers. And if you'll turn back to page 4, line 8, it actually fits under that category appropriately, and that's where that is being inserted. So, Mr. Chairman, that is an explanation of the bill. Like I said, Mr. Chairman, this is something that this legislature responds to every so often on the behalf of the agency who takes care of our workers' comp, on behalf of the many employers in our state, so we can keep their rates understood and inexpensive, and implement the system that we are obligated to do for hazardous employment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions on Senate File 4? Senator Hicks.
So, Mr. Chairman, on page 5, if you go to page 5, line 11, and most of these are talking about professions, but I'm just curious on here, it says parole offices and probation offices. Was that supposed to be officers, or was it supposed to be the office for parole? Just asking for clarity. It looks like it may be a typo is what I'm asking for. Not having time to track the whole thing in, but.
Any other questions before the maker answers? Any other questions? Any other questions? No? Senator Barlow, would you like to answer that?
Actually, no, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I will actually have that reviewed. I think that it's very possible as officers, but if I look above, even under fire protection, it talks about fire protection as a type of employment, and maybe offices includes multiple individuals within a particular type of office. So I will clarify that for the good majority floor leader and the body. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. All right. Sensing you're ready for the question, all those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the Committee of the Whole rise to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 4, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. That squeaks by. Senate File 4 has squeaked by the Senate. Oh, excuse me, Committee of the Whole. It's passed the Committee of the Whole, not the Senate. Sorry. If there are no other corrections, we'll move right on to Senate File 11. Would the reading clerk please read Senate File 11?
Senate File 11, Cancer Early Detection Amendment, sponsored by the Labor Committee, an act relating to public health and safety. Was referred to Committee Number 10, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Baldwin, Barlow, Bouchard, Dockstader, and Hutchings. Senator Baldwin, Chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, do so with a favorable recommendation for Senate File 11, Cancer Early Detection Amendments. And there is a standing committee amendment. If I can have that read in, please.
You can.
Senate File 11, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 3, line 6, delete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go ahead and move that standing committee amendment and go ahead and get it out of the way, and then we'll turn over the explanation to one of my.
Let's see, I think I have to have you say you'll move Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 11.
I will follow.
Or I'll get some corrections over here, so.
Yes, sir. I will move Standing Committee Amendment 1 to Senate File 11.
Yes, thank you.
And a quick explanation of that is the end page, end sentence, rather than make this effective in July, the committee decided that this was effective. If it was an important enough bill to do it, we want to do it immediately. So it just changes the effective date on the bill, and that is simply all the amendment does. If I can get a discussion or amendment, I'll stand for questions on that.
Any questions or discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion to adopt the Standing Committee Amendment Number 1 to Senate File 11, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That amendment passes. And on to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For an explanation of the bill, I will turn to my desk mate, Senator Dockstader.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senate File 11, Cancer Early Detection Amendments. They felt like it was time to do an update on it. The key part of the change comes over on page 2, line 13. The program shall only pay for expenses not covered by insurance for persons who are underinsured. Essentially, the low-income people we're trying to help here. We asked about how many people are involved in it, roughly 200. With the screening, or using the screening, about 70 were denied because of age. We asked about survival. If you don't have this, and they said 40% would have survived had they had an opportunity to have this screening. So it was just essentially time to do a quick update, make sure that the people are have the opportunity, if they're not covered by the insurance, and roughly 200 people using it, ask for your support. It was time to update the cancer early detection amendments. Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Just a quick addition to that explanation is that cancer recommendations for surveillance screening have changed from 50 years of age to 45 years of age. That's a fairly recent change. And in the statute now, it says only those above 50 years of age can meet this screening criteria. So that's the other change that this bill makes, is it lowers, it doesn't lower, it actually makes it according to guidelines from the institutes. It's actually, we're making these recommendations for cancer. So it's one of those bills where we take out the very specific age and make it just to meet the requirements. So that's one of the reasons why people were not meeting it. The age requirement of center docs that told us they were being denied because they're not under 50, but the recommendations for 45 years old now to have a screening. So that was the other piece of this.
Thank you. Is there anything else? Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to understand maybe some clarification. So when we bring in the new language and it deals with, on page 2, starts on line 8 and it talks about the eligibility shall be respected. I think the chairman did a good job of talking about the appropriate age requirements in accordance with national evidence-based recommendations. And here's the question I had. Are uninsured or underinsured? So I'm trying to figure out whether you're insured or not makes a difference as far as whether that's an evidence-based recommendation. So as I heard it explained from the chairman, that's what we're doing here, is looking at the eligibility, and the eligibility changes based on that. I don't know how whether you're insured or uninsured affects that eligibility. That's the first part of the question, because the way I read that is that's part of the determination for appropriate age requirements. So the second part is the next sentence. And then it goes on and says the program shall only pay the expenses not covered by insurances for persons who are underinsured. What happened to the uninsured that we referenced in the first line? So there's really 2 questions there, Mr. Chairman.
All right, there's 2 questions. Is there any other questions before the, yes? Senator Larson.
Mr. Chairman, I think on page 3, it talks about a fund and a program. And I guess, where do the dollars for this fund come from? And how much is in the fund? And do you anticipate if it'll run out? What do we do then?
Other questions? Other questions? Senator Bartle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll take a stab at the first question. So the eligibility, we're talking about lines 8 through 10, which is stricken language, and then the new language, which is be lines 11, 12, and 13. You will note that there is both an age and a eligibility, 2 types of eligibilities in the stricken language. One is age-related, and we're replacing that with the appropriate evidence-based age requirements, that part. And the second part is who have not become eligible for Medicare. So there is these folks, it's another way of saying they're not eligible for a insurance of that type. You could argue that certainly uninsured or underinsured also fit under that category as not eligible for Medicare. It's not specific to that. But most people under the age of probably 63 are not eligible for Medicare. I think that's the first age you're eligible for it. So I think there are changes, absolutely, but I think it's trying to stay within the same vein. And then as far as the second sentence that talks about, Mr. Chairman, talks about the program only paying expenses, I think that maybe it's implied that if you're uninsured, it would pay for the entire based on the entire expense. And if you have insurance, it would pay for the proportional cost that was not covered. But if that's not appropriate to imply that, then we can certainly consider an amendment for this second page. As far as the fund, there is a fund. It is a general fund appropriation. I don't have the balance on it, but I think that what I understood was $1,700 times 200 recipients of this service in I think it's 2021. So the quick math $340,000, I think would get that to what that fund would have had and expended in 1 year. And to the question, what happens if it's not, or those funds are exceeded, to the testimony we heard in committee, there was only one, the presenter was only aware of 1 year, 2014, where the fund was expended entirely, and they instituted a waiting list. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one question on page 2, and maybe either one of the bringers of the bill could answer this, but when we talk about national evidence-based recommendation, would that include possibly a genetic predisposition in a family? For instance, if a couple of parents both had colon cancer and maybe their kid is, or kids, are 2025, would they meet those eligibility requirements, since it basically just talks about age here? Thank you.
Senator Baldwin, would you like to address that?
I think I got one more question.
Oh, okay. Senator Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not a question, but on page 4 or 3, excuse me, lines 2 through 4, it does give the good senator who asked a question about payments an additional answer to his question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Baldwin, you want to answer some of these? Go ahead.
Well, thank you. And to answer that question, we've talked about in committee, talked about making that sentence more specific to one specific organization that certifies, makes it. But as we've talked about, and we talk about a lot in this body, we talk about leaving it more generalized, because names of departments, names of organizations change quite frequently, actually, sometimes in medicine. So we left it very general to include things like the American Cancer Society and all these other organizations that do make recommendations would all fit under that phrase that's in there. Because likelihood is that sometime in the next 5 or 4 or 2 years, titles will change, and then we would have to come back to statutes and make that specific change. And if we leave that generalized, it'll be inclusive of all those organizations. I hope that answered your question.
I think it does. Sensing you're ready to vote, all those in favor of Senator Baldwin's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report, that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 11, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. That one sneaks by the committee of the whole. Senate File 11 has passed the committee of the whole. I got that right that time. Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, may I have privilege of the floor real quickly?
You may.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't mean to swim off into too deep a water here, but I did want to recall for the body that the good senator from Bates Hole was primarily responsible for the program that we just debated. And I can remember as a younger senator being in this chamber, and the national organization came here to honor the good senator from Natrona County. So I regret that he wasn't here today. He might have had some insight, may have some insight on second reading, but this program is primarily, it exists because of the good senator. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the history on that. The next bill to come before the Senate is Senate File 48, Senate Committee of the Whole, that is. Would you please read that in?
Senate File 48, Education, Suspension, and Expulsion Model Policies, sponsored by the Education Committee, an act relating to education. Was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned to committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes, Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, and Steinmetz. Excused, Senator Scott. Senator Steinmetz, acting chairman.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure, Senators Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole rises to report, it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 48. There is a standing committee amendment, And I would ask that it be read in. I'm not moving it, but asking that it be read in. And I will turn over the explanation of the bill to the good Senator Rothfuss.
Did you want to read that? Did you say you wanted to read that in now?
Please read it in.
Yes, okay. Let's read that in now.
Senate File 48, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 2, line 6, delete.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Senate File 48, Education Suspension and Expulsion Model Policies, is a product of the Joint Education Interim Committee. This was one of our interim topics that we wanted to consider the activities related to suspension and expulsion in our schools throughout the state and address any concerns that came up. And we heard from districts over the course of the interim that there was a lot of difference from school district to school district on how they implemented suspension and expulsion policies. We saw that the data was pretty significantly different from location to location, not just the outcome of the data, but the way they collected and what they collected. And so, Mr. Chairman, the intent of the Education Committee was to try and provide a model, uniform structure for policies that school boards of trustees, so the local school districts, could adopt. I'll point out that this isn't mandatory, it's not required, it doesn't force any district to change or even amend their policy in any way. But what we understood was that there was a lot of variance in how it was being done. So the intent of the Education Committee was to work with the Department of Education and then instruct the Department of Education to draft what would be sound policies that districts could look at as model rules for their decisions as they potentially at some point amend those suspension and expulsion model policies. So, Mr. Chairman, walking through the bill specifically at this point, you see the bottom of page 1 and onto page 2, this is the duties of the state superintendent. So basically, these are obligations of the Wyoming Department of Education. A new Romanet is added, which is Romanet 41 under those duties, that the state superintendent shall develop model rules and policies outlining best practices for the reasonable punishment and discipline of students as authorized in statute. Those rules and policies shall include best practices for the suspension and expulsion of students in accordance with state law. And this is a key provision that the model rules and policies, you'll see that there's a point of amendment there, I'll get to that in a moment, developed by the state superintendent under this paragraph shall be designed to maximize student retention and academic success. That was one of the points of emphasis for our interim. And then the final provision that no school district shall be required to adopt any part of the model rules or policies developed by the state superintendent under this paragraph. We didn't want to make it mandatory or required. We just wanted to show what good policies looked like. And we heard a variety of policies around the state. Some had good points, others had good points in different areas. And so bringing together a group to develop what those model rules and policies would look like was a great step in the eyes of the Education Committee. You've got in section 2 some enactment dates where those model policies will be developed by July 1st, 2023 by the superintendent. And then you'll see a reporting requirement back to the Joint Education Interim Committee with those by July 1st, 2023. And this goes into effect immediately pursuant to section 3 so that the Department of Education can get started immediately. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would move Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 48 at this time, and I'll explain the amendment. Mr. Chairman, this is simply 2 cleanup amendments that are actually addressing typos and errors in the drafting. You'll see on page 2, line 6, the error of using the word polices when it should have been policies. This amends that. And then on page 3, line 4, you have delete A and insert as, which is again cleanup. So if there are no questions on the amendment, I would ask for the question on the amendment at this time.
Questions on the amendment? Question on the amendment? If there be no objection, we'll pass a unanimous ballot on amendment number 1 to Senate File 4. No objection, we'll pass that amendment.
So, Mr. Chairman, and then that would be that the Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 48 has passed the Committee of the Whole.
Yes, it's passed the committee of the whole, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Has been adopted. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Has been adopted. Thank you. So with that, Mr. Chairman, back on the bill, I'd be perfectly happy, as would any member of the Education Committee, to answer any questions on the bill.
Any questions on the bill? Any questions on the bill? Senator Hicks? Oh, Senator Landon first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the explanation of the bill. I like the concept. My question is, was there any sense by the Education Committee as to whether or not superintendents or boards out there would adopt this policy? I think it's a great exercise and it'll look good on the books. I just wonder if anyone will use it.
It's a good question. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had that discussion during the interim as we worked this bill. I think when we have the department adopt model policies, in the years that I've been on the Education Committee, in the most recent years, I've seen way more parental involvement. And so these model policies can be tools that parents can take if they're dissatisfied with their district's existing policy, and would just reinforce the need to revise those policies where they're inadequate. So to answer the good senator's question, I would say yes. I don't think these just sit on the shelf for the parents that are struggling and districts that don't have them on the books. They could be very valuable tools.
Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, my question, when we get to section 2, and so if we go to page 2, line 15, it says no later than July 1st, 2023. So the reality is, by the time this gets through the legislature and it gets across the governor's desk and he signs it, that's 90 days for the superintendent that has to develop these rules. So I'd like to know the nature of the discussion, whether the superintendent felt like that could be done. But the part of that question is if they don't have to be adopted by any school district, wouldn't it be better to allow this a little bit more time for people to look at that potential rule out there? But more than anything else, it's a 90-day time frame mandated in the statute now that the superintendent has to do this. And yet it's just going to be completely voluntary by the schools if they want to do that. So I'm just worried that we're placing a pretty strong burden on the superintendent's office with that July 1st date. So just a little explanation, if we could, on that. Why July 1st and 90 days to get it done?
All right. Did I see somebody wanted to answer that? Senator Rothfuss wants to answer that.
Thank you. So we didn't have any concern expressed by the department because they will assemble a working group of experts and meet a couple of times and put together model recommendations for those guidelines. And it really isn't that arduous. It's not like a rule and regulation process, since they're just drafting based on best practices, looking around and putting that together. That's why the concern wasn't raised. As far as why July 1st, though, and not a little more time, it really comes down to when school boards have to make decisions on their policies for the upcoming school year. And if this were to be useful for the 23-24 school year, they would need to be putting that in effect ahead of time. So we backed up from a typical fall start date, make sure that there was enough time for these to exist so that a school district could consider them for their 23-24 school year. That was the justification for it. If there is concern about that, there's no problem with delaying it, obviously. We could give them more time, but that is the reasoning and analysis for it, and we did not hear concern that it was too short of a timeline because it's not a full rule and regulation process. It's just a let's figure out what looks good.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Hicks.
I really like this bill from one component because in my 12 years in the legislature, I don't think I've ever seen this. And so the legislature is imposing a duty on another agency, the Wyoming Department of Education, and the superintendent. And if you turn to the back page, this is what I've never seen before. So when we impose a new duty on an agency, there's usually a fiscal note on here that tells us that it's going to cost a lot of money to do this. So I am extremely impressed with the fact that we can now impose duties on an agency and it doesn't cost anything. So maybe we can get the superintendent to work with some of our other agencies on how to do those fiscal notes. So just an observation, Mr. Chairman. Kudos.
Thank
to
you,
the
Senator
Depart-
Hicks. There you heard it. We've impressed Senator Hicks. Any other comments? Any other questions? Any other? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 48, say aye. All opposed, same sign. That squeaks by the committee of the whole. The Senate File 48 has passed the committee of the whole. The next bill, for your listening pleasure, is Senate File 49. Would you please read that in?
Senate File 49, Safe School and Climate Act Amendments, sponsored by the Education Committee. An act relating to the Safe School and Climate Act was referred to Committee Number 4, which returned a committee recommendation that it do pass amended. Ayes Senators Beitman, Brennan, Rothfuss, and Steinmetz. Excused Senator Scott. Senator Steinmetz, acting chair.
You've heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with a recommendation that Senate File 49 do pass, and I would ask that the standing committee amendment be read in, and I would call on the good Senator Ellis for an explanation of the bill.
Could we read that in? The amendment in, please?
Senate File 49, Standing Committee Amendment Number 1, page 3, line 22, strike.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will explain the bill and then the amendment. To give everyone a little bit of background on why the committee undertook this, this actually was an important issue that I worked on last year in the Joint Education Committee. And it arose from a circumstance that I heard about from my constituents where there was a few football players on one of our high school teams who were being severely harassed and bullied by their own coach. When I first heard about this, my jaw was on the floor and appalled at the behavior I heard that was described to me. In any other private employment context, it would have been grounds for termination, no doubt in my mind. And it really had me concerned about who's hanging out with our kids and what's happening out there. These parents were concerned about this behavior. They reached out to our local school district, filed complaints, and at the end of the day felt that their voices were more or less being unheard. So they reached out to me and another colleague from down the hall. And so we drafted a letter to our superintendent of our local school district asking what was going on. And not surprisingly, we received a response that everything was held confidential and that we wouldn't get any answers. As we followed this story with the parents who had contacted us and students, they had expressed concern to the principal, to the athletic director, and instead of the situation being resolved, the situation escalated and these poor kids were actually retaliated against. It wasn't just happening, this behavior on the field. This particular coach also teaches in our Wyoming public schools. And so there was some definite concern about what kind of retaliation would be occurring, not just on the field and playtime, but with these actual students in the classroom. As a result, our committee decided to look at our privacy laws, our Public Records Act, and one concern that I had and still have is any personnel files are really deemed confidential under our Public Records Act. So this body well knows, those are really difficult statutes to amend. And so those didn't get very far as we did our work in the interim. However, in visiting with some of those parents, they did describe that they looked at the anti-bullying policy that these chambers adopted many years ago, which prohibits bullying and harassment. And they approached the school district, and their interpretation, the district's interpretation, was more or less that those policies really only applied to student-on-student conduct. So what you have before you is a bill that would amend the Wyoming Safe School Climate Act to clarify that bullying can occur between teachers, coaches, and other professionals working within our school district and students, as well as vice versa. So what you'll see here is a requirement in amending the law on 21-4-313. These are the policies that school districts are supposed to adopt to conform with state statutes that prohibit harassment, intimidation, or bullying. Those definitions are defined earlier in the statute. But here it includes, it's not limited to students, school or district, or excuse me, no person, including students, school or district employees, administrators, or volunteers would be covered by this act. Going on to page 2, here's where the statute directed each school district to direct a policy, and you'll see that additional language included. Here we added some language that's saying, at a minimum, the policy should address harassment, intimidation, or bullying occurring or received at school committed by any person, including but not limited to students, school or district employees, administrators, or volunteers. The rest of the statute is more or less conforming. You'll see in paragraph B, beginning on line 18, that the policy shall include consequences and appropriate remedial actions, procedures for reporting, going on to page 3, a process for discussing the district's policies with those individuals, and a requirement that school districts, by a certain date, September 1st, 2023, address how those policies work with, within their school districts and their personnel. With that, I would want to move Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 49. This amendment would strike on page 3, line 22, teacher preparation program standards. We received testimony today from the department indicating that they don't, that falls outside their wheelhouse. So they suggested professional development guidance. As we know, our teachers are often subjected to professional development requirements. And so this just makes that clarification that this might be a topic for them to look at. At this time, I'd ask for any questions on the amendment, and if there are none, a question on the amendment.
Questions on the amendment? Hearing none. All in favor of the, let's see, favor of Senator Ellis's motion to adopt Standing Committee Amendment number 1 to Senate File 49, please say aye. All opposed, same sign. That amendment has passed the Committee of the Whole. Oh, go ahead. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to continue with the final explanation of the bill. On page 4, we also made one clarifying remark. You'll see that the prior law had required that these policies be in place if there were district employees who had significant contact with students. We heard testimony about how the word significant may be confusing, and so just a clarifying amendment that said that the contact doesn't need to be significant, it could just be contact. In conclusion, I would urge the Senate to adopt this. I think this is a tool that parents can use, quite honestly, to approach their districts if they're concerned that there's some horrible things happening. And the most troubling thing to me was after receiving these calls, there was a Public Records Act, an article printed on an online paper, and it got a lot of attention. And certainly I heard from parents who were very supportive of this coach, and I understood their concerns. My only response to them was, you're so lucky that your child wasn't on the receiving end of his bad behavior. It had a ripple effect, though. I started receiving calls from a variety of people, people concerned that basketball coaches were treating children the same way. I received a really heart-wrenching call from a mom who felt her daughter was fat-shamed by her dance coach within our public schools. And so I want to just reemphasize that I think the vast majority of teachers and administrators working in our schools are great people. But we need to be mindful of those who are needing improvement. And so while this doesn't necessarily fix the entire situation that I described to you at the outset of my remarks, I do think this is going to be an important tool for parents to advocate for their kids and make sure that we're doing the best to protect our children who are in these public schools. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions on the bill? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I want to commend the senator for all the work on this issue and the committee as well. I want to take you to page 2, line 12. And I just wondered, is there any danger that language can either be misconstrued or not be inclusive enough to cover a couple of the situations that were just described? I guess that's the question, and whether or not that was discussed. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Baldwin. Or Barlow, excuse me. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to follow up on the good colleagues from Casper's comment. I think the language, and this was inherited in the current statute, is the language on page 7, which says "at school." And so my question is, we have a lot of activities that are not at school, but they are school activities, or there are methods of communication that are within the school context, but they're not at school. So all I want to make sure is, to the good colleague from, I understand what's trying to be accomplished here. I just don't want it to be limited by a physical placement, and it's actually the context of someone who actually is a person of authority. You have to be in physical contact with, you're getting a text from somebody and it's considered bullying or intimidation, et cetera. Nobody may be at school, but they're communicating in some way. So I think that's the context of the concern that I heard. That certainly was what I would be asked about as well. I understand you're inheriting that at school language, but is there some way we could actually maybe flesh that out to be a little more wholesome or inclusive? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions on Senate File 49? Other questions? Senator Rothfuss, you're going to answer those?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate that. So we had extensive discussion on how broad to make this and where to broaden it and where to limit it based on the existing bullying statutes. And as noted by the good senator from the Northeast, we're starting with bullying statute, and there was some original belief that the bullying statute as written, because it was an inclusive list, would be construed to be broad enough to cover a lot of the circumstances that we're trying to address. How it turned out, though, was that school districts had the general impression that the bullying statutes were supposed to be student-student. And the real impetus of this from the Education Committee was to very much clarify that it isn't just student-student. That's one source of bullying, but that we have other concerns that policies must address, and that's where we get the addition of including but not limiting to, intimidation or bullying occurring or received at school committed by any person, including but not limited to students, school or district employees, etc. So the school concept was something else we discussed, at school versus not at school. School events are certainly counted, and there are bullying policies associated with school events. When entirely separated from school, there's case law that causes us problems with really trying to govern it, and we didn't step in and say under all circumstances, and we actually are leaving that to the school districts to sort of decide those boundaries, because once again, this is a directive to school districts to, at a minimum, produce rules that comport with this. That doesn't mean that they can't extend those rules beyond, but we were trying to stay within our lane for what, first of all, is associated with the bullying statutes we had in place and what we knew was going to be acceptable and defensible. So it's not to say this goes as far as we'd like it to go, and it's not to say that it covers everything we want it to cover, but it certainly addresses many of the concerns that we heard during the interim and makes it very clear that anti-bullying, harassment, and intimidation rules and regulations, or policies, I should say, by school districts are going to contemplate these coaching relationships and volunteer parent relationships and other things taking place at school events. So I hope that helps to clarify the two good senators.
Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It does. I just have to repeat the concern that when we talk about being at school, I think a lot of these kinds of situations occur at activities related to the school, even on the road, on buses. I just want to make sure that we feel like the language here in the Senate covers the ground that we need it to cover. And I totally get, that was a great explanation by my friend from Albany County about the lane and what the intention of the bill was. I totally get that, and we may not want to go into broadening the scope or keeping it the way it is, but I do have that concern that when we say at school, what does that mean? I hope it's broad enough that it'll cover what we need it to cover. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could someone please give me the actual strict definition of bullying? Exactly what that entails? Because I haven't been on education. I would like to hear that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Somebody have an explanation for bullying? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the specific phrase that's defined in what is called the Safe School Climate Act, which in statute is 21-4-311, definitions that regrettably are not shown in the bill, which are provided under 21-4-312. But the definition that's relevant is actually A Romanet 1, which includes harassment, intimidation, or bullying. That's the term of art used throughout the Safe School Climate Act. And it means, it's actually an extensive definition, but I'll read it, means any intentional gesture, any intentional electronic communication, or any intentional written, verbal, or physical act initiated, occurring, or received at school that a reasonable person under the circumstances should know will have the effect of A, harming a student physically or emotionally, damaging a student's property, or placing a student in reasonable fear or personal harm or property damage. B, insulting or demeaning a student or group of students, causing substantial disruption in or substantial interference with the orderly operation of the school. Or C, creating an intimidating, threatening, or abusive educational environment for a student or group of students through sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive behaviors. That's the definition in statute that is, and again, that phrase is used throughout, so it's kind of taken as a collective. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Senator Ellis.
Chairman, along those lines, the statute also defines what school, like the premise, includes. And it says a classroom or other location on school premises, a school bus or other school-related vehicle, a school bus stop, sorry, so hard to read, an activity or event sponsored by a school, whether or not it's held on school premises, or any other program or function where the school is responsible for the child. I think the point made is this too narrow. I understand that, but I think the concern is going too broad then. You know, if you have, again, back to this still will apply between two students, if you have them, you know, engaged in activity that's harmful to one another, far off school premises, I mean, what is the responsibility of the parent versus the school? So that's why we wanted to make sure we had adequate sideboards. I think one thing that maybe, I am concerned, I share this too, but we didn't quite thread the needle on it, so I think leaving it as it is probably is the best way to proceed, is the issue of online bullying. I also received a call and a text message from a parent who showed me a screenshot of one of our district personnel actually harassing a student within this district. So I think that, you know, by passing this law, hopefully the districts got the memo and will take these things seriously. You know, the next step in my view would be, how do you start communicating to the public and to parents that these complaints are being taken seriously, they're thoroughly investigated, and that remediation or consequences follow. And I think that that's one thing that, you know, this bill doesn't do. But hopefully it's a good start in at least making districts aware that they need to be looking at their policies probably a little more carefully.
Thank you. Other comments? Other comments? Nope. Sensing you're ready to vote. All those in favor of Senator Steinmetz's motion that when the committee of the whole rises to report that it do so with a favorable recommendation of Senate File 49, say aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Senate File 49 has passed the committee of the whole. Senator Hicks, do you have something to add? Or does somebody else? Yes. Oh, excuse me.
It would be majority floor leader.
Oh. All right, Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman,
Sorry.
I move the committee of the whole rise and report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The committee of the whole is closed then.
right? Yeah. Yeah. Reading clerk will read the committee of the whole report.
Mr. President, your Committee of the Whole, having had under considerations bills on general file, begs leave to report as follows. Senate Joint Resolution 1, do pass. Senate File 29, do pass. Senate File 57, do pass. Senate File 73, do pass amended. Senate File 4, do pass amended. Senate File 11, do pass amended. Senate File 48, do pass amended. Senate File 49, do pass amended. Senator Anderson, Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. President, I move the adoption of the Committee of the Whole report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion's been carried and the report adopted. Hey! Hey! Yeah, all right. Stellar job, Senator Anderson, stellar job. Mr. Majority Floor Leader, that clears the desk.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate adjourn until 10 p.m. tomorrow. Yeah. Why not? Mr. President, I move the Senate adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow, January 12th.
Thank you. Are there any announcements? Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Transportation, Highways, Military Affairs Committee will meet today upon adjournment, so we'll say in about 15 minutes. And Capitol Extension Room W2 and online, we'll consider Senate File 19, Highway Safety Child Restraints, Senate File 20, Driver's License and ID Card Photo Quality, Senate File 18, Benefits for Spouses of Law Enforcement Officers, and if time allows, Senate File 16, State Employee Moving Expenses.
Thank you. Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Your committee number 7, Corporations, Elections, and Political Subdivisions, will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in State Capitol Room W10, and online we'll hear the following bills: Senate File 2, Wyoming Telecommunications Act Sunset Date; Senate File 5, Medical Malpractice Statutory Update; Senate File 6, Insurance Rebate Modernization. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Landon. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you. Your committee number 1, Judiciary, will meet on Friday at 8:30 a.m. to take up the following bills. Senate File 32, prohibiting drones over penal institutions. Senate File 34, trespass by small unmanned aircraft. Senate File 25, district and prosecuting attorneys bar license requirement, that third bill as time permits. And we will meet at 8:30 following a 7:30 meeting in the Supreme Court chamber with the Department of Criminal Investigation. I'll detail that meeting tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 5, Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources, will meet Thursday, tomorrow, January 12th, 15 minutes after adjournment in the Capitol Extension Room 2 and online. We will consider Senate File 74, Slow-Moving Vehicles Amendments, Senate File 30, Apiculture, Agricultural Land Use Purpose, and Senate File 68, Prescriptive Easement for Water Conveyances.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, will meet at 8 a.m. Friday morning to hear 3 bills: Senate File 7, definition of opioid antagonist amendment; Senate File 9, Medicaid coverage, licensed pharmacist; Senate File 37, podiatry medical services, Medicaid. That will be in Capital Extension Room 6.
Thank you. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. Committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources will meet tomorrow, Thursday, January 12th at 8 o'clock in room W002 and online. We'll take a look at 2 bills for sure. Senate File 58, Sutton Archaeological Site Administration, Senate File 59, State Parks Account Agency Expenditure Authority, and if we have time, Senate File 60, Non-Resident Hunting License Application Fees. Thank you.
Senator Biden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your committee number 3, Revenue, will meet tomorrow, Thursday, January 12th. Let's go a half hour upon noon recess so members can grab a quick lunch. And Capitol Room Extension W6 and online to take up the following bills: Senate File 63, Tax Administration Revisions, and Senate File 42, Taxation of Cigars. Thank you, Mr. President.
Vice President Kinski.
Mr. President, your Appropriations Committee, Committee number 2, will meet upon adjournment today to consider LSO 509, a Fund Balance Calculations Federal Encumbrances Excluded Draft Bill, and another draft bill, LSO 405, Local Government Distributions Revisions. We will also continue our consideration of the General Fund Budget, which we began this morning. Tomorrow then at 8 a.m. In the JAC Room 301, we will have the presentation of the January 2023 Craig Report, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group. We've got the January update, always an exciting time. And then 2 other draft bills, American Rescue Plan Act Appropriations Amendments, ARPA, and then State Funded Capital Construction, CAPCON. And then at noon, we will receive information regarding employee compensation. That's a continuation of a long conversation throughout our hearings. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, and one last announcement. We have a tentative change for Rules Committee to move it from 8 a.m. tomorrow to 1 p.m. tomorrow. That's committee number 12, Rules, and that would be in W113, and it's a tentative. But let's go over the handbook changes and et cetera. So, okay, so it looks like it's done. So any other announcements? You've heard the motion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We're adjourned until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.